of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases had this to say to Peter Hamby as part of a week-long Snapchat interview series on the resumption of professional sports. He said the following quote, "There's a way of doing that. Nobody comes to the stadium. Put the players in big hotels, wherever you want to play. Keep them very well surveilled. Have them tested every single week and make sure they don't wind up infecting each other or their family, and just let them play the season out." Very interesting take there. Stephen A., what's your reaction?
I appreciate Dr. Fauci's comments. Obviously, he's the renowned expert on infectious diseases. We know his resume very, very well because we see him all the time. And he presented an option upon which the sports world can return to action. Remember, he emphasized that there would be no fans in attendance. You cannot have that the players need to be secluded, that the players need to be tested. And ultimately, what you're pointing to is that even though it's going to be a compromising situation, make no mistake about it, for professional athletes to perform in empty arenas, empty stadiums, et cetera, the millions upon millions of people that would be watching on TV would give a tremendous boost to the economy. I'm not thinking about the players, and I'm thinking about everybody in terms of their health. But I'm not thinking about games. I'm not thinking about entertainment. I'm thinking about the thousands upon thousands of people who are employed in the world of professional sports that would be without a job in the event that sports doesn't return for a lengthy period of time. And I applaud the fact that, whether it's the president or whomever else is involved, the Adam Silvers of the world, Mark Cubans of the world, Roger Goodell and others, this is not going to be some unilateral decision. The experts, the people that would know a thing or two about all of this, along with the medical professionals, obviously, would play a significant role in reaching this decision. And so as long as it goes down that way, I'm totally comfortable with what Dr. Fauci suggested.
I love that he said this because it kind of validates my own thinking about it. So I feel good about that, Stephen A. It seemed to me from the beginning, common sense says as long as the tests are widely available, and that's really what we're waiting on here, and there's strict quarantining, and he talked about surveillance, so that they're really quarantining. And that may mean away from their families, by the way. I don't see why you can't have sports. To me, the ethical question has always been the fact that you would be taking tests away from people who may really need them, and it's an issue of life and death in order to play a sport. But once the tests become more widely available, then that's great. That's the reason I supported what Dana did. He got his hands on some tests, and people can say, well, how did he get those tests? It doesn't take that many to test for a fight card, for example. I think boxing could do it. Golf, maybe tennis, depending on how that's regulated. Because the lower the number of tests, the easier it should be to do. And once you do that, if you quarantine and are strict about it, I don't see why not. There's a very good argument. It's good for public morale, for national morale. So I'm glad to hear that he said this. And this is a guy who's worked for countless administrations now. So his advice never seems political. It always seems to be based on medical expertise. And so for him to say this, I think is very encouraging for sports fans. And as I've always maintained, there's in addition to this, a good, even ethical argument for why it's okay for sports leagues to pursue tests, so long as it's not an issue of life and death for others. So long as they become more widely available, maybe even out of proportion to the rest of society, for lack of a better term, because I think there is great kind of value in the diversion of sports during a national crisis.
Well, my biggest thing is let's be careful with the word ethical, because obviously if you want to apply it to an administration or whatever the case may be, and you want to challenge what their thinking is in terms of the verbiage emanating over the national airwaves, that would be different. But what I'm saying is that let's not act like thinking about things economically is unethical, because the fact of the matter is economics is what determines people's quality of life, the life that they do have, the life that they ultimately will have. We can't ignore that. Some people's priorities are different than others. That's the world that I come from. Of course you want testing. Of course that should be a priority. Of course the overall health of us as a society and every single human being's lives matter. We understand that. But you do have a situation where if they keep throwing this information out there, it's going to be about a year before we find a vaccine. Now it becomes testing as a priority. And if testing is the priority, you have some people out there that have been appalled at the notion that professional athletes and professional sports teams would have access to tests. But my point is, if they employ thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people, that does matter, and it warrants a conversation as opposed to it being summarily dismissed as unethical to take that into consideration.
Stephen A., I appreciate that point of view in the sense that when you say don't politicize this, a politician's job really and the politics of a situation means the calibrating of various interests, including the point of view of medical professionals, business professionals, etc. But I think generally, that's philosophically, but generally in practice, the way this works is that the economic influence has an outsized influence on the political sphere. And so there's a real concern that the kind of collection of enormous amounts of capital, the very, very wealthy and powerful, can influence the politics of this in a way that is simply unsafe. That is the issue. That's why the president of the American Medical Association had to come out recently and independently put something out through the AMA. Hey, let's listen to the medical experts here, not the people who have overly politicized this. Though I appreciate your philosophical point, I think that until tests are more widely available than they are now, we won't see sports. But once they are, I think that we can see sports, even before a vaccine.
I think I get where you're coming from, and you're talking about the privileged few and what have you, are usurping the many. No, we don't want that. But what we do have to take into consideration is the fact that while you, I, and others who are on the airwaves and others who are still receiving a check can take certain positions, there are people out here in the real world that can't afford to be missing these checks. And they're going to think about that in the weeks to come, not months, not years, weeks to come, because this is really, really hurting them. You understand? And they're going to be looking for a resolution of this in some capacity. You can't ignore that.
It is the government's job. It is the government's job. It is government's job in these situations to ensure that people get those checks.
Yeah, so many layers to this. It's quite overwhelming. Appreciate both of your perspectives, gentlemen. We'll have much more on this as the news continues to come out. When we come back here on First Take, we're talking about the Cowboys' dash of the Patriots, who had quite the offseason. The exit of Tom Brady after 9 Super Bowl appearances, but that era is over, and now the focus is on the future. Listen to this, Stephen A. and Max. The only franchise who has received more value from their draft picks in the last 20 years is actually Green Bay. New England is second. The Pats have the 23rd pick in the first round. They hope to improve on their wild card round exit from this past season's playoffs. Damian Woody, he won 2 rings with the Pats. He knows what it takes. He joins us now. Always good to see you. We miss you, Damian. Stephen A., I'm going to start with you here, though. Should the Pats take a quarterback with this first-round pick?
I believe they should, unless you believe in Jarrett Stidham, which I do not. Obviously, Tom Brady was a 6th-round pick. We get all of that. Stidham was in the 4th round. We get that, too. Garoppolo was in the 2nd round. But when you hear the quarterbacks that have been mentioned, you hear about Joe Burrow. If Tua was healthy, there wouldn't be that. But, Tua could arguably be number 1. So people are projecting he won't fall any lower than 5 or 6 with the Chargers or 5 with the Miami Dolphins. Justin Herbert and Tua, there doesn't seem to be that big of a gap between the two, according to Mel Kiper Jr. So obviously that's a possibility. And then you've got this kid out of Utah State, Jordan Love. I'm thinking about 4 quarterbacks, all right, that are all projected to be first-rounders. If that is the case, and I'm the New England Patriots, why miss out if I don't have to? I can trade up. Now, obviously, if people think if you can get Tua, of course, that's what you do. I'm not going to rule out Herbert or Love in terms of what the New England Patriots should try to get. Now, I'm not saying you give up the farm to get him. You go all out to get Herbert or Love, like moving all the way up to number 3 or whatever. But what if you could move up to number 11 and swap a pick with the New York Jets, or number 10 with the Cleveland Browns, or number 14 with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? I'm saying you could pull off something. Even the Denver Broncos, even though one could argue they might need a quarterback. All I'm saying is that there are options available to you if you're New England to not have to move but so far up to get one of those 4. And if I'm the New England Patriots and I don't have to give up the farm to do it, if I can move up to get one of those 3, Tua, Herbert, or Love, I do it.
Tua, yes. No one else you mentioned, Stephen A. Unless Bill Belichick